Iowa, January 1936. While his neighbors kept their pier-set cabins open underneath, believing airflow prevented rot, tenant farmer Edmund Williams was hammering rough planks around his foundation. They called it a shack fix. They called him wasteful. He built a wooden skirt around the entire 16 by 18-foot cabin, then piled 18 inches of earth and manure against it like a bank. His neighbors trusted conventional wisdom. Keep the underfloor ventilated and just burn more wood when it gets cold. Williams trusted something different, that heating Iowa wind was impossible, but heating a sealed box wasn't. Then the blizzard hit. Temperatures plunged to 22 below zero across southern Iowa, 33 below in the north. Wind drove under every open foundation like a river of ice. Standard cabins became ice boxes. Water froze faster than families could carry it. Floors bit through boot leather, and stoves roared constantly yet couldn't keep up. But Williams's cabin? His floor stayed warm enough to walk barefoot. His water didn't freeze. His stove used half the wood. What did this tenant farmer understand about ground temperature, wind, and heat loss that township carpenters dismissed as old country nonsense until they started copying his boarded-up foundation themselves? If you value stories of practical wisdom that stood the test of time, make sure to subscribe. We've got more documented accounts worth remembering. Comment your city and state. We love reading where these documentaries reach. A January wind pushes under the cabin like a river. The house sits up on piers, a common way to keep timbers off wet ground, but it leaves a hollow underneath that the wind owns. Inside, the stove is throwing heat, yet the family's feet go numb anyway. A tin wash basin crusts with ice at the rim, frost feathers along floorboard seams. Edmund Williams steps across his 16 by 18-foot cabin and feels the floor bite through his boot. Leather. The single-pen log house sits 24 inches above Iowa ground on stone piers, standard practice for keeping sills dry and preventing rot. But tonight, with the thermometer dropping to 10 below and wind gusting across the prairie, that gap beneath his floor has become a wind tunnel. Every gust strips heat from the floorboards faster than his wood stove can replace it. He kneels and presses his hand to the floor near the stove. The boards feel like they've been pulled from a snowbank. The heat from his fire rises to the ceiling and escapes through every crack and seam, while Arctic air washes continuously beneath his feet. His wife wraps her children in quilts and keeps them seated on chairs, rather than letting them play on the floor that feels like standing on January ground. Williams has been fighting this losing battle all winter. 4 cords of wood burned through December, and still the cabin won't hold warmth below waist level. Water left on the floor overnight develops a skim of ice. The family sleeps in layers, and mornings require breaking ice in the wash basin before anyone can clean their face. Every neighbor faces the same problem: pier-set houses that drain heat downward as fast as stoves can produce it. The conventional wisdom says this is simply the price of staying dry. Keep the foundation open for airflow, they say. Ventilation prevents moisture buildup that rots sills and joists. Township carpenter Mr. Harlan preaches this gospel at every barn raising. An elevated house needs to breathe underneath, and comfort comes from feeding the stove harder, not from trapping damp air under the floor. Most settlers accept this trade-off, cold floors in exchange for preserved timber. But Williams has been listening to different advice. Mrs. Kowalski, whose family came from Poland, shakes her head at American building methods. In the old country, she tells him, they sealed houses like ships before winter arrived. Stop the wind first, she says, then worry about heating what's left. Her family banks their foundation every November with earth and manure, treating it as routine seasonal work, like putting up preserves or sharpening tools. Williams studies the problem with a farmer's eye for practical solutions. His house loses heat in 3 directions: up through the roof, out through the walls, and down through the floor into that wind-scoured cavity beneath. He can't fix the roof or walls without major reconstruction, but he can do something about that 24-inch gap that connects his living space directly to the Iowa wind. The mathematics are brutal and simple. His cabin floor covers 288 square feet. When outside air runs 10 below zero and inside air holds 60 degrees, Every square foot of floor fights a 70-degree temperature difference. Multiply that across nearly 300 square feet of flooring, and his stove burns wood just to heat the wind flowing beneath his house. He's not heating a cabin, he's heating Iowa. Standing in his kitchen, Williams watches frost form on the inside of his windows while his stove glows red hot. The physics couldn't be clearer. Moving air strips heat faster than still air. Wind washing beneath his floor carries away every BTU his fire produces, turning his home into a chimney that draws heat down and out rather than holding it where his family lives. He steps outside with a lantern and examines the foundation. The piers hold his house steady and level, but they also create perfect channels for wind to accelerate beneath the structure. Every gust that hits the front of the house gets compressed and speeds up as it flows through the restricted space under the floor, emerging from the back like water through a funnel. The faster the air moves, the more heat it strips from the floorboards above. Williams has seen this principle work in reverse. Mrs. Kowalski's house, banked heavy with earth and sealed tight, holds warmth like a root. Cellar holds cool air. Her floors stay comfortable even when her stove burns low. She uses half the wood Williams burns and keeps her family warmer doing it. The solution crystallizes as he crouches beside his foundation with the lantern casting shadows between the piers. He needs to transform that wind tunnel into a buffer zone, a space influenced by stable ground temperature rather than howling January air. Earth doesn't freeze as deep or as hard as air temperature might suggest. Soil temperature stays closer to the annual average, providing a thermal foundation that wind can't strip away. Williams makes his decision. Tomorrow he starts boarding up the foundation, building a wooden skirt around the entire perimeter of his house. Then he'll bank it heavy with earth and manure, creating a seal that stops wind at ground level and lets soil temperature moderate the space beneath his floor. His neighbors will call it wasteful. They'll call him a fool. They'll warn about rot and rats and trapped moisture. But Williams understands something they don't. You can't heat the wind, and you can't outrun thermodynamics with more firewood. The only winning move is to stop fighting Iowa winter and start using the Earth's own thermal stability as an ally. He sets the lantern down and looks across his foundation one more time. 68 linear feet of perimeter to seal, 18 to 24 inches of bank thickness to pile against the skirt. 7 days of work, maybe 8 if weather slows him down. But when the next cold wave hits, and it will hit harder than this one, his floor won't bite through boot leather anymore. The wind gusts again, driving under his house like water through a sluice. Williams picks up his lantern and heads inside, already calculating board footage and nails. Tomorrow he stops heating Iowa and starts heating his box. The morning after Williams makes his decision, he hitches his wagon and drives to Millerville for lumber. Word travels fast in farming communities, and by the time he returns with a load of rough planks, half his neighbors know what he's planning. They gather near his foundation as he unloads 1-inch boards, 8 to 12 inches wide, cut from local oak and pine. "You'll rot your sills," warns Mr. Harlan, the township carpenter who built half the houses in the county. Harlan has seen what happens when farmers seal up their foundations. Trapped moisture eats timber faster than wind ever could. That's what folks do when the house ain't worth fixing proper. Williams sets down a plank and wipes his hands on his coat. House is fine. It's the wind that's the problem. The Jensen family stops by on their way to town, their wagon loaded with empty milk cans. Tom Jensen climbs down and examines the lumber with a skeptical eye. "Why are you sealing in cold air? That space under there stays warmer when it can breathe." "Warmer than what?" Williams asks. "Warmer than 20 below? That's not saying much." Jensen shakes his head. "You're making a rat hotel. Come spring, you'll have every varmint in the county taking up residence under your floor." His wife nods from the wagon seat, pulling her shawl tighter against the morning cold. "And the smell when that manure bank starts warming up, Lord help your family." Williams understands their concerns because they echo his own doubts. Banking a foundation goes against everything he learned about proper house construction. Ventilation prevents rot. Airflow discourages pests. Sealed spaces trap moisture and breed problems. These aren't old wives' tales, they're lessons learned from watching poorly maintained buildings fall apart. But Williams also knows what he felt beneath his feet last night: ice forming on floorboards 3 feet from a roaring fire, drafts cutting through the house so fierce they extinguished candles, a stove burning 4 cords of wood per month and still failing to keep water from freezing indoors. Conventional wisdom isn't keeping his family warm. Mrs. Kowalski arrives with a basket of eggs to trade, and she examines Williams's lumber pile with approval. In Poland, we call this podpiwniczenie, she says, using a word that sounds like poetry to ears accustomed to English. Foundation ceiling, every house, every year before snow. Harlan turns to her with barely concealed irritation. Ma'am, with respect, what works in Poland might not work in Iowa. Different climate, different conditions. Mrs. Kowalski sets down her egg basket and gestures toward Williams's house. Polish winters reach 30 below. Iowa winters reach 30 below. Wind is wind. Cold is cold. She walks to the foundation and kneels beside one of the stone piers. Ground temperature 6 inches down stays near 50 degrees all winter. Air temperature changes every hour. Which would you rather have under your floor? The gathering neighbors exchange glances. Mrs. Kowalski's English carries a thick accent, but her arithmetic is harder to dismiss. Her own house, a modest frame structure similar to Williams', uses noticeably less firewood than comparable homes. Her family wears lighter clothing indoors and complains less about cold floors. Ground don't stay 50 degrees, objects Jensen. Ground freezes same as everything else. Mrs. Kowalski pulls a small garden spade from her basket and scrapes away snow beside Williams's foundation. She digs down 6 inches and invites Jensen to feel the soil. Frozen on top, but not ice hard, not 30 below. Earth holds heat that air cannot hold. Williams recognizes the demonstration because he's seen similar evidence in his root cellar. Vegetables stored underground stay fresh through winter, while vegetables left in unheated barns freeze solid. The earth provides insulation that air cannot match, but only if you prevent wind from washing away that thermal mass. Banking isn't new, Williams tells his neighbors. It's got a name because people have been doing it long enough to need a word for it. He picks up one of his boards and holds it against a foundation pier, measuring the fit. I'm not inventing anything. I'm just tired of heating the outdoors. The method Williams plans to use draws from techniques documented throughout the Midwest. Banking refers specifically to the practice of weatherproofing a building's foundation for winter by piling earth, straw, branches, or manure against it. The practice appears in agricultural manuals, government publications, and farm photographs from the period. It's common enough to have standard procedures and recognized variations. The technique also connects to older traditions that predate European settlement. The Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara tribes built earth lodges throughout the plains region, structures 30 to 60 feet across, framed with timber and packed with willow, grasses, and thick sod. These lodges took 7 to 10 days to complete and provided year-round comfort because earth buffered temperature swings and blocked wind at the foundation level. Williams isn't copying earth lodge construction directly, but he's applying the same basic principle. Use Earth's thermal stability to moderate the space where people live. Stop wind from washing away accumulated warmth. Create a buffer zone between living space and outside air temperature. You're still trapping moisture, Harlan insists. Come spring thaw, that sealed space will turn into a swamp. Then your sills rot from inside where you can't see it happening. Williams nods because the concern is legitimate. That's why I'm putting in vents. 2 of them, with shutters I can close tight for blizzards and crack open on mild days. He points to locations on opposite sides of his foundation. Still get airflow when I need it, but I control when and how much. The crowd thins as neighbors return to their own work, but the conversations continue at the general store, the blacksmith shop, and around kitchen tables throughout the community. Williams has announced his intention to do something that challenges accepted practice. His success or failure will be visible to everyone, measured in firewood consumption and family comfort through the remaining winter months. As Williams begins sorting his lumber by length and quality, He understands that he's not just building a foundation skirt, he's conducting a public experiment in applied physics. His neighbors will watch every step, ready to say, "I told you so," when his method fails, or "I knew it all along" when it succeeds. The stakes are higher than personal comfort. Williams is betting his family's warmth and his community reputation on the idea that conventional wisdom might be conventionally wrong. Williams begins on a Tuesday morning when the temperature holds steady at 15 above, cold enough to keep the ground workable, but not so bitter that his hands go numb handling tools. He stakes a line around the entire cabin perimeter, keeping the planned skirt plumb and square. The foundation measures 16 feet by 18 feet, giving him 68 linear feet of boards to hang. The first challenge is attachment. Williams needs to secure his planks to something solid, but his stone piers offer limited options for nailing. He solves this by cutting cleats, 2-inch by 4-inch strips of pine, and wedging them horizontally between the piers and the rim joist that carries his floor. Each cleat spans the gap and provides a nailing surface for the vertical planks that will form his skirt. He spaces the cleats every 4 feet around the foundation, checking each one with a level before driving in the attachment nails. The cleats must be level because any sag or bow will create gaps in the finished skirt. Gaps mean wind infiltration, and wind infiltration defeats the entire purpose of the project. With the cleats in place, Williams begins hanging his rough planks. Each board measures 1 inch thick and runs 8 to 12 inches wide, dimensions that provide structural strength while keeping material costs manageable. He positions the planks vertically, lapping the joints so wind cannot knife through the seams. The overlapping technique requires careful planning because each board must cover half the width of its neighbor while maintaining consistent spacing around the entire perimeter. The bottom edge of each plank presents another challenge. Williams needs to seal the gap between the board and the ground, but he also needs the seal to be permanent and windproof. He solves this by digging a shallow trench 6 to 8 inches deep around the entire foundation. The trench allows him to set the bottom edge of each plank below ground level, then backfill the soil tight against the wood. This buried edge technique eliminates the gap that would otherwise exist between the skirt and the ground. When wind hits the foundation, it encounters an unbroken barrier from below ground level to the rim joist. No gaps, no channels, no opportunities for air infiltration at the most critical seal point. Williams works methodically around the foundation, hanging planks in sequence and checking his measurements frequently. The work requires precision because errors compound quickly. A plank hung slightly out of plumb will throw off the alignment of every board that follows. A gap left unsealed will concentrate wind pressure and potentially damage the entire skirt during severe weather. After 3 days of steady work, Williams has his wooden barrier complete. But gaps remain at every joint where boards meet, and these gaps must be sealed before the skirt can function effectively. He addresses this problem using the same logic that governs log cabin chinking: stop air movement with whatever materials are available and effective. Williams uses scraps of cloth torn from worn-out garments, pages from old newspapers, and a mixture of lime mortar and mud to fill the obvious gaps. The cloth goes into wider openings, newspaper plugs smaller cracks, and the lime mixture serves as both sealant and weather protection. None of these materials needs to be perfect. They just need to stop wind from finding pathways through the barrier. The sealing work takes 2 full days because Williams inspects every joint and overlap twice, looking for gaps he might have missed on the first pass. He pays particular attention to the corners where boards from perpendicular walls meet. Corner joints are notoriously difficult to seal tight, and they often receive the most wind pressure during storms. With his wooden skirt complete and sealed, Williams turns to the banking phase of the project. Banking means piling material against the outside of the skirt to provide mass, insulation, and wind protection. The material needs to be heavy enough to stay in place during storms, insulative enough to buffer temperature, and available in sufficient quantity to complete the job. Williams chooses a mixture of soil, aged manure, and chopped straw. The soil provides weight and thermal mass. The manure adds organic matter that will decompose slowly and generate modest amounts of heat through the winter. The straw creates air pockets that improve insulation while binding the mixture together. He calculates the volume carefully. With a perimeter of 68 feet, an average thickness of 18 inches, and an average height of 24 inches, Williams needs approximately 150 cubic feet of banking material. That translates to roughly 5.5 cubic yards, enough material to fill a small wagon 3 times over. Williams spends 4 days collecting and mixing his banking material. He hauls soil from areas where drainage is good and the earth is not heavily compacted. He gathers manure from his barn, aged material that has already begun decomposing and will not generate excessive heat or odor. He cuts straw from his wheat stubble, chopping it into 6-inch lengths that mix well with soil and manure. The mixing happens in batches. Williams spreads soil in a rough circle, adds manure and chopped straw, then turns the pile repeatedly with a shovel until the materials blend uniformly. The mixture needs to be moist enough to pack tightly, but not so wet that it freezes into an unmovable mass during cold snaps. Banking the foundation requires careful technique. Williams starts at one corner and works systematically around the perimeter, piling his mixture against the skirt and packing it tight with a shovel. He builds the bank in layers, compacting each layer before adding the next. The final thickness measures 18 to 24 inches at the base, tapering slightly toward the top. The banking must be thick enough to stop wind at ground level, but not so thick that it holds excessive moisture against the wooden skirt. Williams achieves this balance by shaping the bank with a slight slope that sheds water away from the foundation while maintaining insulation thickness, where it matters most. On the 7th day, Williams completes his foundation work by installing 2 vents on opposite sides of the skirt. Each vent consists of a 6-inch square opening covered by a hinged wooden shutter. The shutters can be closed tight during blizzards to eliminate air infiltration, or cracked open during mild weather to manage moisture levels in the enclosed space. The vents serve as Williams's answer to his neighbors' concerns about trapped moisture and stagnant air. He maintains control over ventilation while eliminating the uncontrolled air washing that has been stealing heat from his floor all winter. Standing back to examine his completed work, Williams sees a foundation that looks radically different from every other house in the county. His cabin now sits on what appears to be a low earth mound, with only the wooden skirt visible above the carefully shaped banking. His neighbors call it a skirt on a shack, but Williams knows the test that matters is still coming. The sky is turning steel-colored to the northwest. The blizzard arrives on January 15th with the kind of sudden violence that catches even experienced farmers off guard. Williams wakes to find snow driving horizontally past his windows, and wind that makes his cabin creak like a ship under sail. By noon, 3 feet of snow has accumulated in drifts against his foundation banking, and the temperature begins its relentless descent toward record lows. The first night drops to 18 below zero. Williams feeds his stove steadily, but notices something different immediately. His feet stay comfortable on the floor. No ice forms in the wash basin. His children play on the floorboards without needing extra clothing, and his wife moves around the kitchen without the heavy shawls that have been necessary all winter. Across the township, his neighbors fight a different battle. The Jensen family burns through half a cord of wood in 2 days trying to keep their pier-set house livable. Jensen wraps his children in quilts and keeps them seated on chairs because the floor feels like standing on January ground. Ice forms along the baseboards where cold air seeps up through gaps in the flooring. Their water bucket develops a thick skin of ice despite sitting near the stove. The cold deepens through the 3rd week of January. Government thermometers in northern Iowa counties record 33 degrees below zero. Southern Iowa, where Williams lives, sees 22 below, temperatures that turn exposed skin numb in minutes and make steel so brittle it snaps like kindling. Williams tracks the crisis through simple observation. His stove burns the same amount of wood it consumed before the banking project, but the heat stays in his living space instead of escaping through the floor. The temperature difference is measurable and dramatic. When he places his hand on the floor near the stove, the boards feel neutral, not warm, but not ice cold. When he checks the floor along the walls, away from direct stove heat, his hand still encounters bearable temperatures. The physics work exactly as Williams predicted. His cabin floor covers 288 square feet, with inside air holding steady at 60 degrees and the enclosed crawl space maintaining temperatures in the 40 to 50 degree range, buffered by soil temperature and protected from wind. The temperature difference across his floor drops from 70 degrees to 10 or 20 degrees. That 4-to-1 reduction in temperature differential translates directly into heat retention that his neighbors cannot achieve. Williams tests his theory by opening one of his foundation vents during a mild spell between storms. Within hours, drafts return to his floor as outside air begins washing through the crawl space. He closes the vent immediately and watches the drafts disappear as the space returns to its buffered state. The proof arrives when Mr. Harlan stops by to check on Williams during the worst of the cold snap. Harlan stamps snow from his boots and steps into the cabin, immediately noticing the comfortable floor temperature. He walks around the 16 by 18-foot space, testing different areas with his feet. "Floor's not biting," Harlan admits, his voice carrying surprise. He kneels and presses his palm to the boards near the wall. "How's this possible with it 22 below outside?" Williams explains the principle without smugness. Ground temperature 6 inches down stays near the county's average annual air temperature, around 50 degrees. When I blocked the wind from washing under the house, that crawl space stopped acting like outside air and started acting like a basement. Harlan processes this information while examining the interior of Williams's cabin. No frost on the windows despite the extreme cold. No ice in the water containers. No drafts cutting across the floor. The family moves around in normal indoor clothing while Harlan keeps his heavy coat buttoned tight. "What about moisture?" Harlan asks. "Trapped air? Rot? All the problems we talked about?" Williams opens one of his vents slightly, just enough to show air movement. "I can manage moisture when I need to, but I can't manage heat loss if I'm always fighting the wind." He closes the vent again. "Come spring, I'll open these wider and let things dry out. Right now, dry timber doesn't help me if my family freezes." Word of Williams' warm floor spreads through the community as neighbors visit to see the results firsthand. The Jensen family arrives on a particularly bitter day when their own house has become nearly unlivable. Tom Jensen's wife steps onto Williams's floor and pauses, recognizing immediately that her feet aren't going numb through her boot leather. "How thick did you bank it?" Jensen asks, examining the foundation from outside. 18 to 24 inches, Williams answers. "Thick enough to stop wind at ground level, not so thick it holds water, against the wood." Jensen walks the perimeter of Williams's foundation, noting how the banking sheds water and how the wooden skirt appears solid and well-maintained. "Do you leave any vent open during storms like this?" "Close tight when it's blowing," Williams explains. "Cracked open on calm days if I need air movement." He demonstrates the adjustable shutters. "It's about control. I decide when air moves through that space instead of letting Iowa wind decide for me." The Jensen children play on Williams's floor while the adults talk, their parents noting how comfortably the children move around without extra clothing. The contrast with their own home, where children stay wrapped in quilts and avoid the floor entirely, could not be more obvious. Mrs. Jensen pulls her husband aside. "Tom, we need to do something like this. The children are suffering, and we're burning wood faster than we can afford." By the time roads become passable again, 3 families on Williams Township line have begun planning their own foundation banking projects. The technique has proven itself under the worst conditions Iowa winter could provide. What neighbors dismissed as a shack fix has become the most effective heating improvement anyone has seen. The cold wave breaks in early February, but its lessons remain clear in the community memory. When wind steals heat faster than stoves can produce it, victory belongs to whoever stops the wind first and burns wood second. Williams's floor stayed warm not because he generated more heat, but because he prevented heat loss through applied physics and a hammer and shovel. The laughter has stopped. The questions have begun. By March, Williams's foundation banking has become the most copied home improvement in the township. The Jensen family completes their skirt in early spring, using Williams's measurements and technique, but adapting the materials to their smaller budget. Instead of new lumber, they salvage boards from an old barn and supplement with split rails where planks run short. Their banking mixture relies more heavily on straw and less on purchased lime, but the basic principle remains identical: stop wind at ground level and let earth temperature moderate the crawl space. Mrs. Kowalski documents the spreading adoption in letters to her sister in Chicago, describing how American farmers finally learn what Polish farmers know for generations. Her correspondence, preserved in family archives, records that 7 houses in the immediate area received foundation banking before the following winter. The technique spreads through practical demonstration rather than formal instruction. Neighbors observe results, ask questions, and replicate methods that prove effective. Williams finds himself in the unexpected role of technical advisor for foundation banking projects throughout the county. Farmers arrive at his doorstep seeking guidance on board spacing, banking thickness, and vent placement. He shares his measurements freely, but emphasizes adaptation over rigid copying. A house on sandy soil needs different drainage considerations than one built on clay. A foundation with different pier spacing requires modified cleat attachment. Each project must solve the same physics problem while accounting for local conditions. The success of Williams's method attracts attention beyond the immediate farming community. A photographer working with the Farm Security Administration documents rural building techniques across Iowa during the mid-1930s, capturing images of heavily banked foundations as examples of practical winter adaptation. One photograph, dated December 1936, shows Williams's own foundation with its characteristic earth banking and wooden skirt, captioned as common practice in Iowa for winterproofing pier-set houses. This documentation proves significant because it establishes foundation banking as widespread rural technique rather than isolated innovation. The Farm Security Administration photographs record dozens of banked foundations across the Midwest, suggesting that Williams's approach represents local adoption of established practice rather than individual invention. The technique appears in government publications, agricultural extension materials, and farm journals as standard methodology for winter comfort improvement. Williams's success also connects to older knowledge systems that European settlers initially dismissed as primitive. The earth lodge construction used by Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara communities on the plains employed the same fundamental principles that Williams applied to his pier-set cabin. These tribes built large, durable homes, typically 30 to 60 feet across, using timber frames packed with earth, willow, grasses, and thick sod. Construction required approximately 7 to 10 days with community labor, producing structures that remained warm in winter and cool in summer because earth buffered temperature swings and blocked wind at the foundation level. The earth lodge technique represented sophisticated understanding of thermodynamics, structural engineering, and environmental adaptation developed over generations of plains living. Settlers who dismissed these methods as primitive often struggled with heating costs and comfort problems that native builders had solved centuries earlier through systematic application of earth as insulation and wind barrier. Williams recognizes these connections through conversations with Mrs. Kowalski and through his own research into local building traditions. Foundation banking appears in agricultural literature dating back decades, described as routine maintenance for maintaining winter comfort in pier-set structures. The technique carries established terminology, standard procedures, and recognized variations because it represents accumulated knowledge rather than recent innovation. Modern building science eventually validates the principles that Williams applied through practical experimentation. Ground temperatures at shallow depths remain much more stable than air temperatures, typically trending toward the local mean annual air temperature rather than following daily or seasonal extremes. This thermal stability provides a foundation for heating systems that work with Earth's natural characteristics rather than fighting against environmental conditions. The physics Williams discovered through necessity align with documented thermal behavior. Soil temperatures at depths of 6 to 12 inches show much less variation than surface air temperatures. During extreme cold snaps, when air temperatures drop to 20 or 30 degrees below zero, soil temperatures at shallow depths might hold steady in the 40 to 50 degree range. This temperature differential, the difference between a sealed crawl space influenced by soil temperature and an open crawl space dominated by air temperature, directly translates to reduced heat loss through flooring systems. Wind washing, the phenomenon that Williams identified as the primary cause of his heating problems, represents well-understood physics. Moving air strips heat from surfaces much more effectively than still air. When wind flows continuously beneath a house, It creates convective heat loss that can overwhelm heating systems designed for still air conditions. Eliminating this air movement transforms the thermal behavior of the entire structure. Williams's approach also demonstrates the principle of controlled ventilation versus uncontrolled air infiltration. His adjustable vents allow him to manage moisture levels while maintaining thermal control. During extreme weather, he closes vents completely to eliminate heat loss. During mild periods, he opens vents partially to provide air movement without returning to the uncontrolled wind washing that characterized his original open foundation. By the following winter, Williams's heating costs dropped to roughly half of his previous wood consumption while maintaining superior comfort levels. His floor temperature remains stable throughout the coldest weather. His family wears normal indoor clothing instead of multiple layers, and his stove maintains consistent heat output without the constant feeding required to compensate for foundation heat loss. The technique proves durable as well as effective. Williams's banking requires minimal maintenance, occasional repair of wind-damaged areas, and seasonal adjustment of vent settings. The wooden skirt shows no signs of rot or pest infestation, dispelling the concerns raised by conventional wisdom. Proper drainage design and controlled ventilation prevent the moisture problems that critics predicted. Williams's foundation banking becomes part of the documented building heritage of rural Iowa, recorded in photographs, described in agricultural publications, and adopted widely enough to represent standard practice rather than experimental. Technique. His success demonstrates that traditional knowledge often contains sophisticated solutions to engineering problems, waiting for practical application by builders willing to challenge conventional assumptions about proper construction methods. When the wind is stealing your heat, you don't win by burning more. You win by blocking the wind and borrowing warmth from the ground.